Men, if you're ready to reclaim your edge, listen up. I used to be held back by constant bathroom trips with multiple wake-ups during my sleep and looking for restrooms whenever I was out. Then I discovered Better Man. After just 2 months, I started experiencing fewer trips to the bathroom, less urge to go, and I even slept through some nights. I feel a noticeable boost in my overall well-being, even sexual stamina. It gives me the freedom and confidence to live life on my terms. Better Man is clinically tested and trusted by thousands of men over 25 years. Ready to take back control? Go to BeBetterNow.com to order your supply today. That's BeBetterNow.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Use as directed. Individual results may vary.
Hello, book lovers. Welcome to Must Love Books. Hello and welcome back to Must Love Books podcast. Today I am here for our Halloween episode with author Stacy Cade, also known as S.A. Barnes. S.A. Barnes works in a high school library by day, recommending reads, talking with students, and removing the occasional forgotten cheese stick as a bookmark. She has carved a name for herself in space horror, starting with Dead Silence in 2022. This year, she has released Ghost Station, and stay tuned for Cold Eternity out in 2025, which is now available for pre-order. She has also published in YA and romance under Stacy Cade. Stacy, hello, how are you?
Hi, I am great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I am so happy to have you here and for our Halloween episode. So happy Halloween.
To you as well.
So I've done horror reads for the whole month of October, and I thought, what better way to end spooky season with our favorite space horror author?
Thank you. I am honored. I think it's amazing. Having only recently joined sort of the horror ranks, everybody's been very welcoming and very open-minded, which I'm very grateful for, because I am this kind of random person who just suddenly said, I'm going to write space horror. And everyone's like, cool, let's check it out, which is really nice because that's not always the way that goes.
The horror community, from my experience, is always just very welcoming and supportive and open-minded to so many new genres, and we get crossover genres and new authors entering the sphere. So I think it's such a great genre to be diving right into.
It really is. Everyone I have met has been incredibly welcoming and just very generous with their time. Because, when you're starting out in a genre, you're, hey, I'm a new author, a new experienced author in this genre. Will you please read my book and possibly blurb it or at least mention it to your readers? There's a lot of that has to go on. And everyone has just been so nice about it. And even just joining HWA Horror Writers of America and going to events and stuff, they've just been really welcoming and lovely, which, is funny because I have to admit, even though I've been reading horror since I was a kid, I had the perception that everyone was going to be like Stephen King, who honestly, even still today, kind of scares me a little bit. So I kind of thought everybody was going to be kind of a little, little spooky, but they're not. They're very, very normal, perfectly lovely people, who just happen to have, darker interests that align with mine. So
you fit right in.
Yeah, I do. Well, I do with my, at some point earlier when I was still writing YA, somebody said to me, you write about death a lot. And I thought, yeah, I kind of do. So I guess horror was just sort of out there waiting for me.
Yes, exactly.
So I had 8 YA novels, and then the most recent romance novels were for adults. 738 Days and Starlight Nights were both contemporary romance for adults.
Okay, and then there's also The Ghost and the Goth.
Yeah, The Ghost and the Goth is definitely YA. I call it my paranormal romantic comedy, which is kind of a mouthful, but that's the most accurate term I can think of for it. And that one actually you can still get as a Kindle, as an ebook. And that one, still one of my favorites, which is about a girl who is the mean girl cheerleader, homecoming queen type in high school, and she gets run over by a bus. and she is stuck. She is not moving on into the light. She's a ghost, and the only person who can see her is the kind of strange guy that they all thought was mentally ill. But it turns out he sees ghosts, and he's not real fond of her because she was not very nice to him when she was alive, and the two of them have to work together. And I had so much fun writing those 3 books, and I'm so glad that I actually got an email from a reader not that long ago saying that she and her sister used to fight over the books. So like having the book in the library, so the parents had to go and get another copy, which I loved hearing that. So it makes me happy that that it found its way into so many people's shelves and hearts, hopefully.
So how about for those who are not familiar with your space horror novels, can you tell us a little bit about what Dead Silence, Ghost Station, and Cold Eternity are about?
Sure, absolutely. So first of all of them are set in what I would consider a near future. So we're not talking like Star Trek super far out there. This is all relatively within the next couple hundred years, and we're still very Earth centric in a way. So in Dead Silence, they are exploring outside the solar system. The primary characters are on a communications crew. They're out there fixing beacons, which allows the farther flung transports and, startup colonies to communicate with Earth because communication is not instantaneous. I tried to make details as realistic based on our current science as possible. And they're out there and they're getting laid off. They're going to be replaced by technology. And their corporation, the one that employs them, has basically said, you're done after this section. And some of them are going to go on to other jobs. But Claire Kovalik, who is our team leader, which is essentially a captain in this scenario. She leads the team. She is just going to go work an office job, which is really hard for her because she loves being out in space. So when they get a very strange distress signal, it's outdated and odd. Claire decides that they're going to pursue it because basically she doesn't want to go back to Earth. There's nothing waiting for her. So they go after it. And when they get there, they discover the Aurora, which was a luxury space liner that vanished 20 some years before with no hint as to what happened to it. And there it is, whole and intact and seemingly just floating out there. And they decide that they're going to board. Claire and her communications crew are going to board and try to claim it as salvage. But of course, once they get on board, it's very evident that bad things have happened and that leaving is not going to be quite as easy as they thought. So that's Dead Silence. I refer to that one as my Titanic meets The Shining set in space. Is my little blurb. I think it's like pretty close. Like I think it hits the mark there. Is a pretty accurate description based on what I've heard from others. So Ghost Station is a little different because this one, my whole thought process behind Ghost Station was I wanted to pursue what is scary to me, which the scariest thing to me is when you can no longer trust your own perceptions, when you're not sure if what you're seeing is real or what you're experiencing is real. And so that sort of drove this story. In this story, it's again set in a slightly futuristic world. Corporations are leading space exploration. Again, not that different from today. They work. So what happens is when corporations want to claim a planet, so it's minerals, it's water, it's whatever resources, in order to keep big corporations from gobbling up everything, cough, cough, Amazon, cough, cough, they have a residency requirement, which basically means the corporation in question has to send out a team that has to live on the surface or in orbit for a certain amount of time for them to be able to say, this corporation to be able to say that planet is ours. We're claiming it. It's ours. So they have teams that go out and do this. There's a lot of people living and working in space. Problem is, of course, is that is very detrimental to human beings, both mentally and physically. It's actually the condition I created for this story is called ERS, Eckhart-Reiser syndrome. And it is based on winter over syndrome, which is a real thing that scientists and the staff at the Arctic and Antarctic stations have experienced when you're out of sync with sun and isolation. All of that sets in, and it can have physical effects. It can have, obviously, emotional and psychological effects. In this circumstance, the people who are living away from Earth for too long or working in space or whatever, you're talking, suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, violence, addiction, all of these things. So character in this scenario is Dr. Ophelia Bray. She is from a wealthy corporation family, though she has broken off and is doing her own thing. She is trying to focus on treating ERS, and she is desperate to prove herself after a terrible professional incident that resulted in the death of a patient. And she signs up basically to go with a crew that's recently experienced a loss, to try to help prevent ERS from afflicting them, because it is sort of contagious in that way. But when they get to the planet, which is supposed to be an abandoned planet, it's only supposed to be them. And it's dark all the time because it's tidally locked. So it's very creepy. I had fun with that. And they're on this giant hab that's empty, but weird things start happening. Things get moved. They hear noises. They discover some really uncomfortable things about the people who may have lived in that hab earlier. There are alien ruins. And gradually what starts happening is that as people start experiencing more and more effects and some people die, Ophelia is questioning whether this is all really happening. Do they all have ERS? Is there some other, factor on the planet? Like, what's really going on here? And I had a lot of fun with that one too. Sorry, I feel like I'm babbling on about this, but they're
personally
hard to
really
describe.
love horror. I personally really love horror that is kind of makes you question, are they crazy or is it a ghost kind of thing? Very reminiscent of like Mike Flanagan's Netflix horror shows, Haunting a Hill House, Haunting a Bly Manor, which I actually just finished watching that second one recently and was obsessed. But I really love that kind of speculative genre of horror, and seeing it coming about more in the written word has been just so exciting for me. This is really
I
all
love
for
it
me.
too. Well, absolutely. But I mean, it was really funny when I sold Dead Silence. There was this, when we were going out on submission with it, there was this, sci-fi and sci-fi horror is a thing, but it's kind of hard to sell. And a lot of people are really nervous about sci-fi. I mean, and obviously it sold it, but then I think Tor Nightfire, which is my publisher, and they're amazing. I think even they were surprised with the kind of demand that exists for this type of thing. And that's great. I mean, and then there's more coming into the market, which is wonderful. So yeah, I'm on board with that. And which is why, so the third book, I went a completely different direction. So both Ophelia and Claire are questioning their sanity at various points in their stories. But with Cold Eternity, which comes out in April 2025, Hallie, supernatural, wouldn't believe it if it was right in front of her face. Is very much this person that you're screaming at, will you please pay attention? Because we know more than she does. So Hallie basically worked in the government for the Colonies, United Nation of Colonies, UNOC, and witnessed something that she shouldn't have, and it basically is in hiding because people are going to try to kill her or co-opt her one way or another. And she decides she needs a place to hide, and the perfect place to hide is this, what's called a dead ship, but it was originally a cryo ship for the wealthy and fortunate. So think celebrities like Walt Disney or all those various people who have been, supposed to have frozen their bodies or whatever in cryogenic preservation. This kind of thing, it's kind of a cult sort of thing that existed in the previous century, but it's still out there floating because they had a trust of all these wealthy people to keep it in place. Now it's kind of a museum, but now the museum is shut down. She's like, perfect. They're looking for a caretaker. It's empty. I'm gonna go, Of course, the problem is when she gets there, it's creepy and weird and not exactly as empty as it should be. But again, it takes her far longer than it takes us, at least I hope, to kind of catch on to the fact that, these things that you're ignoring, you should not be ignoring them. So unlike the other people who are like, I'm questioning my sanity, what's really happening? She's like, oh no, I'm sane. That's not anything to worry about. So it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun writing that story because it was such a different angle. And it was based, originally kind of came to me with that. I'm sure you've probably seen it's like a meme that goes around on Facebook where it's a conversation where someone's like, would you spend the night in the cemetery for $80 an hour? And someone's like, yes, I would drive Casper wherever they needed to go. I would, it had all these things that they would do. And I'm like, that's basically it, So that was a lot of fun. And it also gets me a chance to kind of play around with my Chuck E. Cheese animatronic sphere, which is a thing I have from childhood. So I got to put some of that in there too, in a different form.
That is excellent.
It was fun. It was really fun.
So basically, Five Nights at Freddy's in space.
Kind of, yeah. Because there's so this guy who created the ship the century before Hallie, gets on board, was kind of a, sort of a God found me and told me that I need to save all of you sort of thing. And he was kind of recruiting people, and they used an AI projection to recruit people, and they were in these AI projection hologram things were in the form of his adult children talking to people, and those are still there on this ship, and hundreds of years later, and it's creepy and weird and funky stuff is going on, and that was fun too.
So one thing about your space horror novels, and this is something that is important in both science fiction as well as fantasy, and that is your world building. And I think you do like such an excellent job of really detailing these worlds that you have created in these stories that are believable, feel realistic, yet still have that, fictional science fiction element to them. How did you approach world building in these novels?
Thank you, first of all, for saying that. I appreciate that. World building, I know always that I'm set slightly in the future, but I don't want to go too far into the future. I want it to be recognizable. Because if you get to a point where people are using technology or whatever that's not something we can kind of imagine happening, it's really hard to put that into a story, I think. So really, I just look at what I need. I also try to take where we are now and project forward. So in other words, based on the way we've been trending, it's probably not going to be NASA or the European Space Agency that does some magnificent thing in space next. It's probably going to be a corporation just because of how that's happening. And when we get to that point where corporations are going out and able to do these things, they're going to be looking to make money and make claims. And where have we seen that before? So I'm kind of trying to use both the past to extrapolate, but also like look at where we are and the paths that we could take. But the thing to me that is most important is to focus on the people and what people do, like what human beings do. Human beings are greedy. We're always going to be greedy, unfortunately. And that shows through. So I try to do that so that when I then go to the things that are strange, like, this engine is capable of this speed, or we're actually capable of putting people in cold sleep, that stuff, you're like, yeah, okay, because you said this other stuff that I know is true, I'm going to believe you on these things that are a little more fantastical at this point. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my approach, but I also look at it from the standpoint of what needs to work for this story and what's creepiest. This idea. So Ghost Station starts off with when she wakes up when Ophelia is on the ship and they've been transported through cold sleep to arrive at this other planet, and she wakes up and there's a moment where they're playing kind of a terrible prank on her because it's literally just her and these 5 other people. That's it. So if something happens and she thinks that something has happened to them, she doesn't know how to get home. She doesn't know how to run the ship. So it's like, how do you use that isolation? How do you use the technology and the world to amp up that tension and horror? That's what I like to do anyway.
Oh, yeah. And it really creates this very atmospheric style of storytelling. And I think that's something that can really just suck a reader in and not let us go. Like, we're hooked, we're in, and I personally could not put either of these books down that I've read so far, the first 2. And honestly, the atmosphere and the world building is what really brings the horror elements together and solidify it in a kind of masterful way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Honestly, it's just thinking about what I find eerie or what I find creepy. It's, I used to worry, or not worry, but I used to think about when I, for example, would read Stephen King or any of those guys, I would think, how do they sleep at night? They think about all this creepy stuff. How do they sleep? Now that I'm in this situation, I'm like, ooh, this would be good. Let's do this, And it's like, it's very different when you're in control of the creepy and the weird versus someone else is in control of the creepy and the weird.
Oh,
so I'm glad to hear you say that, because looking for everywhere I can to turn that up just a little bit, because it's so much fun as a writer. As a reader, it still scares me.
So there is one thing that I have always heard and I have always said myself, and that is never, ever look at a writer's search history. So what are some crazy things that you have had to Google or research for writing these novels?
Gosh. Some basic stuff, because I'll be honest, I'm not a physics person. I'm not an astrophysicist. So I had to figure out things like I knew, for example, on the planet that they go to in Ghost Station, I knew I wanted it to be tidally locked because I knew that meant one side would be bright, one side would be dark, and what that would be. I didn't know the terminology. I think it's called the Terminator Zone, which is where you land, which is in between the light and the dark side. I didn't know stuff like that. I had to look up. I had to be careful. That's a spoiler. Never mind. I had to look up the freezing temperature of alcohol to figure out if alcohol would be frozen and how long it would be frozen in space for. Stuff like that. You're like, just, oh my gosh. And then, different things about, people's injuries. And, if you were really stabbed in the face with a screwdriver, would this happen? Like, how would all of this work? And yes, my search history is quite dramatic in some ways. And other times I'm looking at things and just going, well, I think this makes sense to me, so we're going to go with it, because you can do that fortunately in a speculative genre. You can say, oh, well, blood droplets would look like this when they float through the air, because they're not going to let me do it. So I have to kind of, like, through zero gravity, I have to kind of figure out, well, this is what it would look like, and this is how it would go. So yeah.
And when you have more of a speculative world, you do get to kind of bend those rules a little bit and create some of your own as well.
You absolutely do. It was really interesting, and I apologize because I cannot remember who was talking about it. I think it actually might have been Veronica Roth was talking about building magic systems and getting too in detail about how things have to work and how this affects that. And she's like, and then I remember that in sci-fi we have warp engines, that is not a real thing, and that nobody can really, like, we don't have to explain that. There are certain things that you can just say, this is the way it works, because we have accepted that, faster than light engines, warp engines, whatever. I had somebody ask me that once, don't ask me how the engines on my ships work. I don't know. They work. I can tell you they can get you from here to there, and that most of the people on board probably couldn't fix them if they broke. That's true for all of us in cars.
Yes,
you know what
exactly.
I mean? Like,
that actually makes it more realistic and relatable.
That's what I think too, because I think about this, like, I'm talking to you via Zoom, we're on computers. I would have no hope of figuring out how to fix this if it broke, if it could be fixed. I mean, it all just sort of happens, and we kind of take it, we don't treat it as magic, but we assume that it will work, right? So I think you can kind of do that with a lot of things in speculative fiction, because, and Linnea Sinclair, who was my critique partner, had this great thing that she would tell people about, like, when you have someone who is in their own environment that they're used to, they're not going to walk up and be like, oh, this is the Pulpenflisher, and it does this, this, and this, and this, and this is how it works, because they're not going to explain that in the same way that we wouldn't walk up in a contemporary novel, open the microwave and go, I'm going to put my food in here to be irradiated. Like, no one, it doesn't work like that. So you just have to, people will accept it based on if it makes sense with the world and with the rules that have existed so far, so it's just always an interesting line to kind of find what you can get away with and what you need to explain.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So one thing I always ask my authors on here is, what is your writing process like when you start a new novel?
That is a great question. It used to be a certain way. I'm finding, well, certain things change over time, but also I'm finding that every book writes a little differently. Again, quoting Linnea, she says something like, you know how to ski, but you haven't skied this particular mountain before. So you have the skills, but every book is a little different. Typically, what I do if I'm starting out for something, I'm going to write down the things that I sort of know. So I'm going to journal a lot about the character. I'm going to journal about, okay, I saw this scene in my head. I think it must work this way. I am what Becca Syme calls an intuitive or a discovery writer. So I don't like to know a whole lot. I want to know kind of where the character is at. I have to know obviously somewhat of how the world works also, but where the character is at the beginning, their emotional state, what sort of journey they're on. Which sounds like super, what I want to say, like, like literary, academic, whatever. But it's not that. It's more about, I feel like people connect with a story because they see change in a character, right? The character has been altered by the events that they experience. So in order to do that, you have to know where they start and where they end. You have to know what the effects are even before you figure out what is it that's going to do this to them. So with Claire, was, about her ability to connect with other people and the way that she kept herself distant and the reasons that she kept herself distant. And knowing that the end had to show that she had made some progress with accepting, who she was and what she needed, and that she deserved to have human connection, right? So I have to kind of know those things, even if I don't know what that looks like. I had no idea what that looks like. Most of the time, I don't know what the end looks like until I get there. I'll be honest. We're writing the climactic scene. I'll be careful not to do too many spoilers here. With the shuttle or with the Alina in inside the Aurora, and I was like, all right, great. Now what? What do I do? So, I mean, I'm very much that person, like figuring it out as I go. But then I also like to know, like in the middle, there's a certain point where they can't, the things, a character they've been doing it this way so far, it's not working for them anymore, and they have to make a decision to try something new. So I like to know that as well. But then, so I write down everything I kind of know, like just in very loose form in notebooks. I have notebooks everywhere. And then most of the time, what I try to do is I want to try to get the first 3 to 5 chapters down before I try to work on a synopsis. I mean, some people I know write the synopsis. I can't do that. I even hate writing synopses, even for books I've already written.
Oh yeah.
I feel like
I've never been a synopses writing fan at all. And I've said that on this show probably at least 3 other times before, and that will never change.
It's hard. And it's like, I also feel like it messes, this is going to again sound super like, oh, authory, whatever, but it messes with my process because then I feel like I have told the story already. And I don't want to tell, I don't want to get any more detailed than that. The one exception I will say to that was I had this idea for a book, and I had written like notes because I didn't want to forget, so I didn't want to forget like what kind of the gist was in my head. And then the opportunity came up where my agent was like, hey, do you have anything like this? And I'm like, yes. And so then I like sent her that like 1-page basically vomit of here's this idea. And she was like, yeah. And so then from that, I developed the chapters and then wrote a full out synopsis, which actually then became Death's Daughter, which we sold earlier this year, which is awesome. So that time it was a little different but that was only because I was trying to preserve it for, so I didn't lose it. It's like when I actually sit down to write, the process is different.
So you mentioned Death's Daughter, and I actually have that on my list to ask you about. Okay. So you recently announced your 3-book deal with Bramble Romance for Death's Daughter, and I would really love to talk about that and, what you are able to share at this point in the process.
Sure. So it is... terminology is really tricky because it's being considered a contemporary romantasy, and romantasy I know is attached to many, 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 many things these days. But it is essentially there's a dark academic vibe to it too because it takes place in a college. When we were talking about it, when we were pitching it, I think my agent had talked about it's Ninth House meets Percy Jackson, which is fairly accurate. What I really wanted to do was to kind of go back to a lot of the stories and authors that I loved back in the early 2000s, 2010s, the Rachel Vincent, Rochelle Mead, all of those urban, we call it urban fantasy. I don't think that's actually a term. I think we're using different terminology for it now, but that's what it was called at the time, where you have magic and entities, but connected to the regular world in some way. And so that's what this is. So basically, Jo is a senior in college, and she is working very hard to have a normal life. She is Death's daughter, but does not let that doesn't affect her in any way. She's, trying to sort out her feelings for her former TA. And that's very complicated. It's complicated. And, just have her friends and enjoy her senior year. She's at a private school on the East Coast. And she does have to feed. She's this, she's a daughter of Death. All of the children of these old ones have to feed, basically. And so she, rather than taking life, she feeds on like minor disappointments, rejections, failures, basically all tiny versions of death, like the emotional aspect of it. She's learned to suffice that way. She's learned to do that. Because the other thing to keep in mind with all this is the old ones, they call themselves gods, or they refer to themselves that way, but they're really not. They're just supernatural entities that have these abilities. And so their theory is that all the myths and all the urban legends about vampires and all the Zeus and the Hera and all that stuff, that all comes from them. Like, they generated those myths, among the humans. So Jo is aware of some of this, but she was raised as a human. And she's doing all right, barring the complications with the TA, until Death names her as his successor. And what that does is triggers a whole lot of crap to come sliding her way, because that puts a target on her back. And then also triggers some other, I can't say too much, but it basically just puts a target on her back with all these people kind of coming after her, and her decision to she's kind of walked this very fine line between trying to be human and dealing with who she is at the same time. But then she's going to have to start making some different choices to protect the people that she loves. So that's pretty much book one right there.
So I am already completely hooked. And waiting for that pre-order link, because this is just straight up my alley, and I'm so into it.
I have never had a book like this that I can recall. Granted, I was writing it and I was not writing on contract, so I was just writing to have fun. But, I work full time. So lunch is my sanctuary, but I was like whipping out my Chromebook and being like, okay, like I need to add to this chapter. I need to know. It was just a lot of fun. Very throwback in a lot of ways from the romance angle, because, you do have multiple love interests, which is super fun. And I got to have a lot of fun with the dialogue. It was just, and also there's really a lot of, I'm going to say horror elements. People die in really bad ways in this book, because that's part of who I am too. So I don't know. I'm very interested to see, because it's so funny. The horror folks have been so welcoming. If there is something, they're like, oh, I wish there wasn't that tiny bit of romance. Just the tiny smidge of romance in all of my horror books. And so I'm very interested, because I wonder if the romance people are going to be like, these people keep dying so bloodily. That's just me. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm genuinely having a great time, exploring this world, and I'm super excited to. I've turned in the first draft, and working on ideas for books 2 and 3.
Well, and just like with the horror genre, there are a lot of subgenres in romance as well. So I think kind of like a horror rom is going to really honestly hit hard with the romance girlies. I think that one's going to be exactly what people are looking for when that comes up.
I hope so. I mean, because I feel like there is that element in it that kind of, it's a blend of all kinds of things. And that's one of the things I'm really grateful for, is that, we're getting into that mode. I think it all stemmed honestly from YA, because in YA you didn't, and initially, gosh, I even remember in Barnes and Noble when they didn't, it was just YA and nothing was divided by subsections. So you could blend anything you wanted and just put it all in there, and it was great and nobody had a problem with it. And I think that really led to a lot of innovation, And I'm really hopeful that as we see more things like romantasy, or horror, and I have heard of horror romance, I think it is a thing.
Yes, it is.
As we see more of those blends coming, I think that that's going to open that up again, where you're having that writers feeling like we can take the familiar and just tip it just a little bit and add this other element and really come up with something new. And I'm excited for that.
When you bring up a really interesting point too, I wonder if the lack of subgenres in YA is kind of what has led to us creating so many genre bending stories today and not really following the standard historical rules in genres. There's so much blending over the last few years, and you know, horror rom and dark romantasy and science fiction horror. We have so many genres that are just blending together. And yeah, I wonder if that really does come from, at least in part, from YA being just YA and anything goes, because there really weren't subgenres. You're absolutely right.
There weren't. I mean, there really weren't. I mean, that did come later, and I think that because I wrote paranormal romance, I wrote sci-fi romance. I was all over the place in YA, and it was all just me. It was just like the author kind of was the brand essentially, or the author. I do think that some of this is happening as the YA market has shifted, and more writers like me are moving into different areas or trying different things, because we're bringing that experience with us. But I don't know that that's exclusively it. It might also be just that one of the cool things, of course, about being so interconnected now, and with the creators on TikTok and creator everywhere, is that you're getting to see things where people are, there's more creativity in some ways. And I think there's some more flexibility, because it's no longer just, oh, we have to do this, this, and this because that's what sells. I think there's a little more like, oh, we can point to this stuff that's happening over here from other creators and see maybe there's a market for this. I think indie publishing has always had that flexibility, and they often lead the way with starting trends. And I think traditional publishing tends to look to them sometimes.
I think so too. And that's something that we talk about on this podcast a lot too, is how, in a way, indie publishing absolutely leads when it comes to writing trends and publishing trends and, what's hot right now and what people all want to read. A lot of that comes from indie publishing and self-publishing as well.
Absolutely. I do think so, because I think that, what's awesome about that is you're getting to write what you love, and then you're finding a community. And then that's when traditional publishers, who, honestly they're looking at profit and loss statements. They're looking at from the financial investment, and, they need to see that there's a worthy investment there. And so in a lot of ways, the indie and self-publishing folks are doing a lot of the groundwork and the hard work to get things to be, romantasy, I'm sure, has existed before Fourth Wing. You know what I mean? Yep. I'm sure it was there. And and I'm also thinking too, like monster romance and all these other things that are sort of coming up. All of these things are definitely things that start in indie and self-publishing. And then when there's enough of a market, then trad publishing is willing to dip their toes in. I do think that it's got to be that balance, because trad publishing, what they can do is reach so many more people. They can blow something up. And as an author, that's one of the things that is obviously, working with the team and having that advantage of being able to do that. Because I'm also not a good marketer. So I want somebody else to do that. But I think that it's wonderful that there's room for everybody.
Yeah. And when it comes to to writing, especially with indie publishing, there really is room for everyone. There is a space for everyone. There is a place for every kind of story, however you want to tell it. And that's something that I have always really loved with the writing field as a whole.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting too, because I was talking with someone, and she was talking about a book that she had edited and had done well. She's like, if it had come out now, 10 years, 10 years later, it would have hit like, like gasoline on a flame, because we're just in a different spot. So it's so much of it is interesting about, trends and how they build and how all that works and what people are reading. And I mean, I honestly think this horror renaissance, which is not a term I created, but someone else is using, is because when things get complicated, we either, pandemics and elections and all of this stuff, we tend to go toward either comfort toward like Hallmark type stuff, which I love also, or we go, well, at least there's not a serial killer in my basement. We either go one way or the other.
Right.
It's really interesting to see all these factors and how they dive in and how they connect to things. So yeah, I have no idea where we got into that topic, but I'm interested.
And I told you that this was going to happen. So currently, your novel Cold Eternity has a giveaway on Goodreads. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cold Eternity comes out April 8th, 2025. That seems almost impossible that we're at 2025, but okay. And as you mentioned, it is available for pre-order everywhere, but you can, if you are a NetGalley user, it is definitely up there for request. But also Goodreads has a giveaway going on now through November 5th. It is open only to United States entries, sorry, but they are giving away 100 copies, the paper ARC, they being Nightfire. So get over there to Goodreads and enter if you would, if you're interested. And yeah, that's really exciting.
It is very exciting. Well, again, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I want to wish you a happy Halloween.
Thank you. You as well. So I'm excited. I love Halloween. I just like this entire time of year, although now you and I are both, we're close proximity wise in terms of geography, and it is hot today, which I was not thrilled about.
It felt so weird. I stepped outside and I was like in the like chill mindset. I had a little shawl on me, and we got the leaves and everything, and there was even a little bit of a breeze, so I was like mentally prepared for chill. And I stepped outside and I like had a shock at how warm it was. I'm like, and I even saw the weather report. Like, I knew it was going to be hot, but it didn't like sink into my brain.
Summer out here. What is happening?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be cold again in 2 days.
Sure. And then I'm done. I mean, I'll be complaining about it.
All right. Well, once again, thank you for being here today on Must Love Books podcast, and happy Halloween.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been Must Love Books. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon under @MustLoveBooksPodcast. Thank you and happy reading.
Men, if you're ready to reclaim your edge, listen up. I used to be held back by constant bathroom trips, with multiple wake-ups during my sleep and looking for restrooms whenever I was out. Then I discovered Better Man. After just 2 months, I started experiencing fewer trips to the bathroom, less urge to go, and I even slept through some nights. I feel a noticeable boost in my overall well-being, even sexual stamina. It gives me the freedom and confidence to live life on my terms. Better Man is clinically tested and trusted by thousands of men over 25 years. Ready to take back control? Go to BeBetterNow.com to order your supply today. That's BeBetterNow.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Use as directed. Individual results may vary.